Have you ever wondered why the individuals who rise to positions of extraordinary influence are rarely the most ethical, the most brilliant in conventional terms, or even the hardest workers in the room? There exists an invisible architecture of power that operates beneath the surface of what we're taught to value. While society conditions you to believe that success flows naturally to those with high IQ scores, impeccable moral character, or relentless work ethic, the reality paints a starkly different picture. The people who genuinely control resources, command unwavering respect, and shape the trajectory of organizations possess something far more potent than traditional intelligence. They operate with what can only be described as a shadow form of cognition, an ability to decode the unspoken language of human motivation, to perceive the currents of power that remain invisible to the average person, and to strategically detach from the crippling need for external approval. Most individuals stumble through existence as unconscious participants in a game they don't even realize they're playing, their strings pulled by forces they cannot identify, reacting emotionally to situations they fundamentally misunderstand. If you've ever felt perpetually outmaneuvered in your career, relationships, or social dynamics, if there's a nagging sensation that everyone around you is playing chess while you're still learning checkers, then what I'm about to share will fundamentally alter your perception of reality itself. If you enjoy stories like this, consider subscribing. Most people who watch aren't subscribed yet. The conventional narrative you've absorbed since childhood is designed specifically to maintain social order, not to empower you individually. You were taught that transparency equals trustworthiness, that kindness automatically generates reciprocity, and that good things come to good people. These aren't universal truths, they're control mechanisms. Niccolò Machiavelli wasn't the villain that history textbooks painted him to be. He was simply a pragmatist who dared to document the uncomfortable gap between our idealistic assumptions about human nature and the way people actually behave when their survival or advancement is at stake. This chasm between expectation and reality is precisely where most people experience their greatest suffering and most devastating defeats. You've invested years, perhaps decades, trying to be the good person, the transparent colleague, the understanding friend. You've opened yourself up emotionally, shared your vulnerabilities freely, operated with integrity even when others didn't. And what has this principled approach actually earned you? Perhaps you've been betrayed by people you trusted implicitly. Maybe you've watched less talented individuals climb past you on the organizational ladder while you remained stagnant. Possibly you're exhausted from constantly giving without receiving equivalent investment in return. This pattern ends right now, in this moment. Over the next portion of this exploration, we're going to systematically unpack 9 fundamental principles of shadow cognition. These aren't motivational platitudes designed to make you feel temporarily inspired. These are psychological frameworks, battle-tested strategies for recognizing and neutralizing the manipulation that surrounds you daily, tools for constructing an impenetrable fortress of mental sovereignty. Before we proceed, you need to understand something critical. This knowledge cannot be unlearned. Once you develop the ability to see the mechanisms of influence operating in every interaction, you cannot return to the comfortable ignorance you currently inhabit. You will begin recognizing the subtle power dynamics in your closest relationships, the strategic positioning happening in your workplace, and most uncomfortably, the weakness and self-deception reflected in your own behavioral patterns. If you're not genuinely prepared to confront and eliminate the part of your identity that finds comfort in victimhood, in blaming external circumstances for internal choices, then this might not be the journey for you. For those who remain, understand that you're about to step into a fundamentally different understanding of human interaction. The first principle we must examine is what I call the strategic deployment of silence. Observe human behavior in any social setting and you'll notice something fascinating. Most people treat conversation like a compulsive activity, filling every potential void with words, explanations, justifications, and unnecessary elaboration. This constant verbal output isn't communication, it's anxiety management. People are fundamentally terrified of silence because silence forces them into direct contact with their own thoughts, their own insecurities, their own lack of substance. So they fill the void reflexively, offering up the intimate blueprints of their thinking patterns, their emotional triggers, their strategic weaknesses to anyone who happens to be listening. In doing so, they transform themselves into completely predictable entities. And in any competitive environment, predictability equals vulnerability. The cultivation of shadow intelligence begins precisely when you stop using language as a tool for seeking validation or managing your own discomfort and start deploying words with surgical precision. Machiavelli understood intuitively what modern psychology has now confirmed through countless studies. The individual who speaks least in any high-stakes environment typically wields the most substantial power. Why does this dynamic exist? Because in any social exchange, information functions as currency. Every time you speak, you're spending this currency, revealing your position, exposing your reasoning, broadcasting your emotional state. Conversely, when you listen with focused intensity, you're accumulating wealth. You're collecting data about the other person's motivations, fears, desires, and strategic vulnerabilities. Think carefully about the last time you felt genuinely intimidated by another person's presence. Was it the individual who was loudest, most aggressive, or most verbally dominant? Almost certainly not. It was the person who remained perfectly composed, who watched you with unwavering attention, who allowed silence to expand until it became almost unbearable. That silence creates what psychologists call a relational vacuum, and human neurology is hardwired to find vacuums intolerable. If this perspective is shifting how you see your daily interactions, hit that like button and let me know in the comments what patterns you're starting to recognize in your own life. When you maintain strategic silence, other people's anxiety compels them to fill that empty space. They start talking to manage their own discomfort. In doing so, they voluntarily reveal their true intentions, expose their hidden insecurities, and hand you the exact roadmap for how to influence, persuade, or if necessary, defeat them. All of this valuable intelligence flows to you simply because they couldn't tolerate the psychological weight of your silence. Stop explaining yourself to people who haven't earned that explanation. Stop defending your decisions to individuals who don't have authority over your life. Stop offering your opinion before someone has specifically requested it. Transform yourself into what I call an information black hole. Absorb everything in your environment. Reflect nothing back unless it serves a strategic purpose. When people cannot accurately read your position on issues, when they cannot predict your responses, when they cannot categorize you into familiar boxes, they cannot formulate effective strategies against you. This uncertainty makes them cautious, makes them seek your approval, makes them volunteer concessions they would never offer if they felt they understood you. Silence isn't merely the absence of sound, it's the presence of controlled power. But here's what most people misunderstand about wielding power effectively. And this brings us directly to our second principle. You've been systematically conditioned throughout your entire life to perceive every event, every person, every outcome through a rigid binary framework of moral judgment. Good versus bad, fair versus unfair, right versus wrong, ethical versus unethical. This constant moralization of reality is not enlightenment. It's a chain that keeps you psychologically imprisoned. The Machiavellian cognitive framework doesn't operate in categories of good or bad. It operates in categories of effective or ineffective, functional or dysfunctional, strategic or counterproductive. When a predatory animal hunts its prey in nature, do we condemn it as evil? Of course not. We recognize it as necessary for survival, as part of the natural order. When a hurricane destroys infrastructure, do we judge the storm as morally malicious? No, we understand it as an inevitable force of nature. Yet you consistently torture yourself by projecting your moral framework onto a universe that operates without regard for your sense of fairness. You experience intense anger when someone betrays you because you believe they shouldn't have done that, as if the universe operates according to your preferences. You spiral into depression when opportunities don't materialize because it wasn't fair, as if fairness was a fundamental law of nature rather than a comforting human construct. The development of shadow intelligence requires you to step completely outside this emotional judgment system. You must learn to view reality the way a skilled mechanic views a malfunctioning engine. When a vehicle won't start, the mechanic doesn't waste energy being offended by the engine or questioning why the universe would allow such an injustice. He simply diagnoses the broken component and either repairs it or replaces it with something functional. When someone attacks you verbally, professionally, or socially, do not squander your limited emotional energy feeling offended or victimized. Offense is the luxury of people who haven't yet understood the game being played. Instead, shift immediately into analytical mode. What motivated this attack? What resources or positions do they want? What leverage do they currently possess? What vulnerabilities did they expose while attacking? How can I neutralize this threat most efficiently? This is what I term strategic amorality, and it's perhaps the most misunderstood concept in power dynamics. Strategic amorality doesn't mean you abandon all ethical principles or become a sociopath. It means you refuse to allow your ethical framework to blind you to the actual mechanisms of power operating in your environment. But what comes next might surprise you, because it contradicts what most people assume about strategic thinking. You can absolutely maintain your personal ethics, your integrity, your values. But you must first become a cold, clear-eyed strategist, because a good person without power isn't virtuous. They're simply a victim waiting to be exploited. The good person with power can actually implement their values in the world. The good person without power can only watch helplessly as others impose their will. So stop asking yourself, why did they do this to me? As if you're entitled to fair treatment in an indifferent universe. Start asking, what does this move allow me to do next? What new information have I gained? How can I turn this situation to my advantage? This cognitive shift from victim to strategist is the foundation of everything else we'll discuss. Now, there's a common misconception about individuals who develop this kind of strategic intelligence. People assume that mastering power dynamics requires you to become emotionally cold, socially distant, a calculating robot that other people naturally distrust and avoid. This assumption is completely backwards, and it reveals an amateur understanding of influence. This brings us to our third principle, which I call calibrated vulnerability. True mastery of social dynamics understands that humans are fundamentally emotional creatures who make decisions based primarily on feelings and only secondarily on logic. If you present yourself as too perfect, too competent, too invulnerable, you don't inspire admiration. You inspire envy. You create enemies who want to see you fail simply to prove to themselves that you're human after all. Therefore, you must strategically provide them with a flaw, but not a real flaw that actually undermines your position. You deliberately display a small, carefully chosen, ultimately harmless weakness to disarm the people around you. Perhaps you publicly admit to being technologically incompetent in some minor way. Maybe you share a mildly embarrassing story from your past that makes you seem relatable. Possibly you ask people for small, insignificant favors that make them feel helpful. This triggers what psychologists call the Ben Franklin effect, named after Franklin's observation that people grow to like those they help. When people assist you, or when they perceive a flaw that makes you seem human and relatable, their psychological defenses lower significantly. They feel either superior to you in that specific domain, or they feel a sense of camaraderie and connection. They think to themselves, oh, he's just like me. He struggles with the same things I do. This perception is exactly where you want them. Share this video with someone who needs to understand these dynamics. Sometimes the most powerful gift you can give someone is a new lens through which to view their reality. While they're bonding with your carefully curated flaw, while they're feeling comfortable and connected, they remain completely blind to your actual strengths, your real plans, your genuine strategic capabilities. You're actively managing their perception of you, deliberately humanizing yourself just enough to avoid becoming a target, while keeping your true core, your actual objectives, and your real vulnerabilities locked in a vault they don't even know exists. The principle here is simple. Never expose your throat, but occasionally show them a scratch on your arm. That minor, superficial wound makes them feel safe around you. And a safe enemy, someone who has lowered their guard because they don't perceive you as a genuine threat, is extraordinarily easy to outmaneuver when necessary. This leads us directly into our fourth principle, because the previous strategy is actually a specific application of a broader psychological phenomenon. We exist in an era of almost unprecedented narcissism. People are more obsessed with their own image, their own feelings, their own narrative than at perhaps any point in human history. Everyone is essentially starring in their own movie, and everyone else in their life is just a supporting character or background extra in their personal drama. The catastrophic mistake you've been making is trying to be the star in their movie. You attempt to impress them with your accomplishments. You try to demonstrate how intelligent, capable, or interesting you are. Stop doing this immediately. Shadow intelligence dictates that you don't compete for the spotlight in someone else's narrative. Instead, you become a mirror. You reflect their emotions back to them with subtle amplification. If they're angry about something, you validate that anger and help them feel understood. If they're excited about a development, you match their energy and enthusiasm. You adopt their language patterns, their phrases, even their physical posture to some degree. When you mirror someone effectively, a powerful psychological transfer occurs that most people never consciously recognize. They don't actually see you as a separate individual. They see themselves reflected back. And because humans have a fundamental tendency towards self-love, they will transfer that positive feeling onto you. They'll walk away from the interaction thinking you're one of the most intelligent, charming, empathetic people they've ever encountered, even though you barely talked about yourself at all. This isn't about being inauthentic or fake. It's about strategic data collection. When you're mirroring someone, you're not emotionally reacting to what they're saying. You're observing, collecting information, mapping their psychological landscape. You're learning their triggers, their core values, their soft spots, their leverage points. While they're occupied falling in love with their own reflection in your eyes, while they're feeling deeply understood and validated, you are systematically identifying the keys to influence them. A mirror has no ego. It simply reflects whatever is in front of it. Become that mirror in strategic interactions. Let them admire themselves. Let them talk endlessly about their concerns and interests, and while they're distracted by their own image, you quietly move the pieces on the board without them ever noticing what's happening. This brings us to perhaps the most counterintuitive principle we'll discuss, and it's the one that separates people who occasionally succeed from people who consistently dominate their chosen field. Let me ask you something. What's the root cause of almost all anxiety you experience? If you examine it carefully, you'll discover that anxiety stems from attachment to specific outcomes. You desperately want the job, the relationship, the recognition, the promotion. And precisely because you want it with such intensity, you unconsciously signal desperation. You broadcast scarcity, the feeling that this opportunity is your only chance, that you need this to work out. And in the psychological laws that govern power dynamics, scarcity is profoundly repulsive. But here's where it gets interesting, and this might completely change how you approach your next major opportunity. People instinctively run from those who need them. They are magnetically drawn to those who could take them or leave them. You must develop what I call radical outcome independence. This is the mental framework that says, I will plan for this outcome. I will work intelligently toward this goal. But if I don't achieve it, I will be absolutely fine. I will adapt, pivot, and find another path. This isn't giving up or lacking ambition. This is the ultimate power position. When you're genuinely willing to walk away from the negotiation table, you hold all the leverage. When you're truly willing to lose the relationship, you get to set the standards and boundaries. Machiavelli understood that fear of loss transforms you into a slave. If your employer knows you're terrified of losing your position, they own you completely. They can extract more work for less compensation because you have no leverage. If your romantic partner knows you're terrified of being alone, they own you. They can mistreat you because they know you won't leave. You must mentally rehearse and accept the worst-case scenario. Visualize losing everything. Make genuine peace with that possibility. Realize with certainty that you would survive, adapt, and eventually thrive again. Once you destroy the fear of loss, once you become genuinely indifferent to the outcome while still pursuing it strategically, you become dangerous. You become untouchable. You can speak uncomfortable truths because you don't fear the consequences. You can take calculated risks because you don't fear the potential failure. The person who doesn't need anything from the interaction is paradoxically the one who eventually gets everything they want because they operate from a place of abundance rather than starvation. This abundance mindset completely changes your energy, your decision-making, your negotiating position. Now, this next principle is going to contradict everything you've been taught about seeking peace and harmony in your life, but it's absolutely essential for continued growth. Most people actively want a life characterized by peace, comfort, and universal approval. They want everyone to like them. They avoid conflict at absolutely any cost, seeing disagreement as failure. This is a fundamental biological error in judgment. Conflict isn't the enemy of development. It's the forge in which intelligence is hammered into its sharpest form. Without resistance, without opposition, without challenge, your mind atrophies like an unused muscle. Machiavelli explicitly advised the prince that he should not merely be prepared for war, but should actively study it during times of peace. Shadow intelligence recognizes the functional utility of having an enemy. An enemy sharpens your thinking. An enemy forces you to focus your scattered attention. An enemy reveals your weaknesses and vulnerabilities so you can address them before they become fatal. If you don't have an enemy, if everyone likes you and nothing challenges you, you become complacent, soft, vulnerable. You get metaphorically fat on your own ego. Sometimes you must deliberately use the friction of rivalry to propel yourself forward. Examine history carefully and you'll see this pattern everywhere. Tesla needed Edison as a rival to push his innovations. Muhammad Ali needed Joe Frazier to elevate his greatness. Steve Jobs needed Bill Gates. The friction between opposing forces creates the fire of transformation. So don't waste energy complaining about the people trying to bring you down. Use them. Let their hatred be the fuel that powers your discipline. Let their doubt be the evidence of your genuine ambition, because people only doubt what they secretly fear might succeed. Even more strategically, understand that having a common enemy is the fastest possible way to build alliances. Nothing unites a group more quickly than a shared threat. If you want to unify a team, a family, or a movement, you don't give inspiring speeches about love and cooperation. You identify a common threat and rally everyone against it. Do not fear your enemies. Curate them carefully. Choose an enemy worthy of your potential, and let that war elevate you to levels you couldn't reach in comfort. This brings us to our seventh principle, and it's one that will initially feel uncomfortable because it challenges one of the most sacred modern values. You believe you are one consistent person. You believe in being authentic, in showing up as your true self in every situation. This belief is a severe limitation. You are not one person. You're a multiplicity of selves that shift depending on context. You are different with your parents than you are with your employer. You are different with your romantic partner than you are with your competitors. Shadow intelligence is the conscious, intentional curation of these various masks. It's the recognition that authenticity is often just a socially acceptable excuse for a lack of self-control. I'm just being authentic, says the person who ruins a professional dinner with their uncontrolled temper. That's not authenticity. That's childish inability to regulate your emotional state. You must view your personality as a construct, as a tool, as something you can deliberately adjust based on the requirements of the situation. When you enter a high-stakes business negotiation, you must wear the mask of authority, cold, decisive, unwavering in your position. When you're with your family, you wear the mask of the protector or nurturer, warm, engaged, emotionally present. This isn't lying or being fake. This is calibration. This is emotional intelligence. You wouldn't use a hammer to tighten a screw. You wouldn't use a screwdriver to pound a nail. Why would you use the exact same personality configuration for every different situation in life? Machiavelli noted explicitly that the prince must be a great pretender and dissembler. He must be capable of being both the lion when ferocity is required and the fox when cunning serves better. If you are only the lion, you walk directly into traps because you lack subtlety. If you are only the fox, the wolves devour you because you lack strength. Fluidity is survival. Be like water, taking the shape of whatever container you're poured into. When that container breaks, you flow seamlessly to the next one. You don't shatter into pieces. Now, this next principle is perhaps the most psychologically difficult for people with good hearts to accept, but it's absolutely essential for protection. There's a common saying, trust but verify. That's far too soft. The accurate version is, verify extensively, then trust provisionally. The naive mind automatically projects its own goodness onto the external world. You think, I wouldn't lie to this person, so they won't lie to me. I wouldn't betray someone in this situation, so they won't betray me. This projection is the direct cause of your greatest heartbreaks and most devastating defeats. Shadow intelligence accepts a brutal truth about human nature. Everyone, without exception, acts primarily in their own self-interest. Even acts that appear altruistic are often driven by the need to feel good about oneself, to be perceived as good, or to build social capital for future use. This isn't a reason to become bitter or cynical. It's simply a reason to be awake, to be conscious of the actual forces driving behavior. You must develop what I call a background radiation of suspicion. Note carefully that I said suspicion, not paranoia. Paranoia is fear without evidence, seeing threats that don't exist. Suspicion is simply heightened attention to detail, carefully watching for inconsistencies between words and actions. Watch what people actually do, not what they say they'll do. Words are cheap. Words are specifically designed to manipulate perception. Actions are the only reliable truth. When someone offers you what seems like an incredible opportunity, immediately ask yourself, what's in this for them? What do they gain from my participation? When someone compliments you excessively, especially if you don't know them well, ask yourself, what are they trying to distract me from? What do they want? Machiavelli wrote something profound. Men are so simple and so ready to obey present necessities that he who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. Do not be the person who allows themselves to be deceived. Require proof of claims. Test loyalty before you depend on it. Give people small amounts of power or responsibility and observe carefully how they use it before you give them the kingdom. It is infinitely better to be pleasantly surprised by someone's loyalty than devastated by their betrayal. We arrive now at the deepest principle, the one that connects psychological shadow work with strategic power dynamics. This is where Carl Jung and Niccolo Machiavelli, though separated by centuries, would find complete agreement. You must consciously integrate your monster. Society conditions you relentlessly to be harmless, to be nice, to repress your anger, your greed, your desire for power. But here's what they don't tell you. A harmless man is not a virtuous man. A harmless man is just a weak man. He cannot do good in the world because he doesn't possess the capacity to stop evil. He's ineffective. Shadow intelligence requires the recognition and acceptance that you are capable of terrible things. You have the capacity for cruelty. You have the capacity for manipulation. You have the capacity for violence if sufficiently provoked. You must not deny this shadow aspect. You must own it completely. Why is this integration essential? Because if you don't know your own capacity for darkness, you will never recognize it operating in others. You'll be naive, easily manipulated by those who have integrated their shadow and use it consciously. Even worse, if you repress your shadow completely, if you deny its existence, it will control you unconsciously. It will emerge as passive aggression, as resentment that poisons your relationships, as self-sabotage that undermines your goals. You must bring the monster into the light. You must look directly at it and say, I see you. I acknowledge you. I control you. When you know with absolute certainty that you could destroy someone if you chose to, but you consciously choose not to, that is virtue. That is controlled power. That is strength. Machiavelli's ideal leader was never a saint. He was a man who understood how to use harsh methods for beneficial ends when necessary. You need that edge. You need that darkness visible in your eyes that communicates to the world. I am peaceful by choice, not by inability. I am kind because I choose to be, not because I'm too weak to be otherwise. When you integrate your shadow, when you make peace with your capacity for darkness, you become psychologically whole. You stop being afraid of the darkness you encounter in the external world because you've already mastered the darkness within yourself. These 9 principles aren't a simple checklist to complete. They're a filter that changes your perception. From this moment forward, you will walk into social situations and see things differently. You will hear the things being communicated in silence. You will recognize when people are mirroring you and when you should mirror them. You will identify the lions and the foxes, the predators and the prey. You are no longer a civilian unconsciously participating in the war of minds. You are now a conscious combatant who understands the battlefield. But I need you to understand something important. With this power comes a significant burden, the burden of isolation. When you wake up to these dynamics, you realize with uncomfortable clarity how many people are still sleeping. You will feel a distance growing between you and your old life. Your old friends may sense that you've changed. They might say you're colder now, quieter, more calculating. Let them think whatever they need to think. You are shedding the comfortable skin of the victim. You are releasing the desperate need for external validation. You are stepping into the rare territory of the outlier, the person who sees clearly while others remain comfortably blind. The question at this point is not whether these principles work. History has proven they do across thousands of years, in every culture, in every context where humans compete for resources and status. The only question that matters is whether you have the stomach to use them. Most people will watch this entire video, they'll nod their heads in recognition, and then they'll go right back to being prey. Back to complaining about unfairness, back to hoping the world becomes nicer, back to being perpetually surprised when people act in their own self-interest. But you're different. You're still here. You're listening to the silence between these words. If you're ready to explore the abyss of human nature without blinking, if you're ready to systematically dismantle the weak version of yourself and construct something untouchable in its place, then you know exactly what to do. Subscribe to this channel, but only if you're genuinely willing to handle what comes next. The rabbit hole goes much deeper than what we've covered today, and we are just getting started. I'll see you in the shadows.